Deputies Thomas Byrne, Kathleen Funchion, Richard Boyd Barrett, Pat Casey, Thomas P. Broughan, Gino Kenny, Mick Wallace, Bernard Durkin, John Brady and Stephen Donnelly are all offering. Deputy Byrne.
Guramagat, Count Corla, and I want to thank you very much for giving all of the deputies the opportunity to debate this matter. I called for this debate last week and I am glad that it's happening. I think it's a necessary debate. When the Carillion company finally went bust, and it should be noted that many financial investors have been shorting this company for quite some time, so worried were they by their financial performance. But when it did finally go bust, I issued a statement almost immediately asking the Minister to clarify what the situation was for the schools that are involved. And the schools involved are St Philomena's in Bray, Coláiste Roisin in Bray, the Carlow Institute, Tyndall College in Carlow, Loreto in Wexford and Eureka College in my own constituency in Kells. I know Deputy English has a lot of constituents who attend that school as well, and was certainly involved with all of us in working towards it. But those schools now, the Minister said on that day when I called 2 weeks ago that he was confident, and that's the exact word he used, that the schools wouldn't be affected by the collapse of Carillion. A very simplistic answer given to a question that I and others raised in what was a complex situation, and an answer I took at the time in good faith. That if the Minister for Education is saying that he's confident this will be sorted, I took it in good faith and accepted it. But it turns out that he can no longer be confident, because these schools at the moment are idle, are empty, are in general being guarded by security guards, and in some cases subcontractors and suppliers are taking goods out of the school premises. And I can say that all around the country. The other issue, Minister, is in relation to the subcontractors. There are subcontractors around the country who have been very badly affected by this collapse, who haven't got paid. One company in Kells, and Deputy English will know them, I'm sure, are currently owed €62,000. Small company there, depending on business from this, thinking it would be a good thing. It hasn't been. Would the Minister meet these suppliers, as well as making every effort to ensure that this situation is resolved as soon as possible? We have 2 minutes each. It's sufficient.
Thank you, Deputy Byrne. Deputy Funchion.
Thanks, Count Corla, and again I'm glad that we have the opportunity to discuss this. The ability of the collapse of a private company in another jurisdiction 2 weeks ago to have such an impact on the completion of Irish public school buildings is unfortunately the direct result of public-private partnership. Our schools or other public buildings cannot be at the mercy of the results of public-private partnerships going wrong. The schools in question, which Deputy Byrne has named, include 2 in my own constituency, Tyndall College in Carlow and the Carlow Institute of Further Education, need clarification from the Department. The email that was sent to schools from the Department was vague, with no detail, and did nothing to ease any concerns that parents, principals, teachers, or most importantly students have. The schools in question are badly in need of new buildings, with some waiting years, decades even, in very poor conditions, and they need assurance that they can still relocate to their new buildings as soon as was promised. Initial reports indicated that work has been postponed indefinitely at least 2 sites, and that there are doubts over the status of others. The fact is that there are no longer contractors working at the site in Carlow since last week, and all work is halted on that development, which was 90% complete and is to cater for 2,000 students. And I would also say that this obviously has an impact on the workers in the area as well, who are left without wages and without certainty. When the news initially broke, reassurances were given that there would be no impact on the building works of these schools, and last week the NDFA released a statement placing responsibility with shareholders and funders to ensure the buildings are completed. But how long will this take, and has the discussion even started, and at what stage is it at now? I'm very conscious of time, and I suppose just to say really that our students need to know where they stand. We cannot ask students to be studying for exams and they're in inadequate buildings and they don't even have proper facilities. So I would ask the Minister to please clarify the situation today.
Deputy Boyd Barrett.
Minister, People Before Profit has always opposed public-private partnerships as a means to build schools, to build housing or other vital infrastructure. And what has happened with Carillion and what has now affected Coláiste Roisin, St Philomena's, Eureka Secondary School, Tyndall College and the Carlow Institute for Further Education confirms what we predicted when the government and the main opposition party embraced the notion of public-private partnerships. And that is, just as happened with McNamara and the housing developments in this city, now has happened with Carillion and on several other PPP projects, when the private for-profit entity goes bust, walks away, whatever it might be, we're left holding the can. It's not the private sector who takes the risk, it's the school students who've been having to exist in poor school conditions for years, hoping to get into a new school building and then fall victim to private interests who were in the business not of delivering schools but making profits, and if they're not making profits, walk away or go out of business. That is the fundamental problem with PPPs. So I think, first of all, we need emergency legislation to get hold of those schools and ensure that the kids and the schools can go into those buildings now. This should not be allowed to delay people going in and using those schools. We should recognise we have to get those schools back into full public ownership so they're not controlled or dependent in any way on private for-profit interests. And I will conclude by saying this. In our committee, the Budget Scrutiny Committee and PAC and any other relevant committees should now examine in detail both what happened here in Carillion with the public-private partnership there, but also on the whole model of public-private partnership needs to be investigated and examined to see whether, as I believe is the case, it is absolutely something should be abandoned for the provision of schools and other vital infrastructure.
Deputy Pat Casey.
Thank you, Cairn. Minister, 2 schools in Bray are completely unsure as to when their school buildings will open and to their future maintenance services due to the collapse of Carillion. Raheen and St Philomena's in Bray are awaiting the completion and opening of the long-awaited essential buildings. I immediately contacted the department with PQ demanding clarity on this, and I have to say I was very disappointed at the answers supplied so far. When we in Fianna Fáil raised a question about this matter, we were assured by you, Minister, and you were confident that the 5 Irish schools wouldn't be affected by this collapse. However, answers to parliamentary questions received by office last week reveal a hands-off and a careless attitude to this very serious issue for both school communities. I can confirm that in Wicklow, the school community in Bray are very concerned, and rightly so. They have organised public meetings to inform parents, and many students and staff have expressed deep concern about their new school at a time when we should be celebrating the new future of Raheen and St Philomena's. For a government to have such a hands-off approach also raises question marks about the funding model being used to build these schools. Schools are essential public buildings where the community in Bray rightly expect government to control, not evasion behind the NDFA. So, Minister, in short, can I ask you today, when will these schools open? When will all maintenance contracts be fully honoured to the satisfaction of the School Board of Management? Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Broughan.
Thanks, Cairn. Well, I would share the sentiments, I think, of Deputy Boyd Barrett. Since, I think, 2008-2009, in particular, the Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael governments have decimated the public capital programme and resorted, in fact, to this PPP approach. And recently we had one of your colleagues, ministers, Mr Andrew McDowell, your former main economic advisor, telling the Budget Committee why we should use PPPs and try and keep these projects off balance sheet. But at the end of the day here, the people and the state, and especially the communities around Rathlin, St Philomena's, Tyndall, Eureka and Loreto, they're having to pick up the pieces for a failed and short-sighted government policy. The key issues that arise here, of course, is the whole tendering process. I mean, people will ask how the Dutch investment company and indeed Carillion got through a tendering process for the IF, the Irish financial section of Anti-May, which regulates these companies, or which looks at PPPs. How indeed did that happen, Minister? And the whole level of oversight. I mean, what were you aware of? What were you ministers aware of in relation to the development of these contracts? Many of us in this House, we have bad memories of aspects of these PPPs in relation to some of the previous school bundles, in particular in relation to the treatment of workers and the treatment of tradesmen who worked on these schemes and who often found they were working for out-of-state contractors and whose RSI payments, whose pension payments, whose tax matters and so on were not sorted in a way in which was, if you like, beneficial to workers. So there are grave questions over what has happened here. You ministers are responsible. You've got to tell us, as I said, particularly in relation to tendering, in relation to your level of oversight, you've failed us. Thanks.
Deputy Mick Wallace, please.
Thank you, Concordia. Minister, Carillion and other such companies engaged in so-called business process outsourcing add nothing of value to the economy. They are simply middlemen. They have access and have contracts and nothing else. What kind of research is done into these firms before the contracts are awarded? Over the last 10 years, Carillion's profits have continuously declined while its debt levels have skyrocketed. They ran up debts and sold assets worth £217 million to continue paying dividends to shareholders from 2012 and 2016, according to a parliamentary paper published in Britain this week. The group paid out dividends of £376 million over the 5-year period. It generated just £159 million of net cash from operations. The report shows the group's dividend continued rising even as the cash flow to support it evaporated. When dividends are paid on the basis of expected profits, the company is effectively borrowing money to pay its shareholders. Minister, who decided to give these people the contracts? It was well flagged that these people were not coming with a great report card. Was there any? What research was done? Listen, PPPs are lauded as on the basis that risk is transferred to the private sector. But when something goes wrong, where does it come? It comes back to the state. And who's going to bail out the situation? It certainly won't be the private sector, Minister. The nature of competition for government contracts needs to be looked at. With these PPPs, there are just a few sellers in the market, so there's very little competition. Instead of giving contracts to multinationals who hire someone else to do the work, why doesn't the government look at actually engaging directly with the people who actually do the work? And with the system you have at the moment, you're just making executives and shareholders rich. It's nonsense. And it's little wonder that PPPs are costing 15% plus.
Thank you, Deputy Durkin.
Thank you, Concordia. My main concern, obviously, in this whole situation is the extent to which this particular situation might affect the customer, i.e. the Department of Education and the parents and children who are awaiting completed school projects. I'm not so concerned about the public-private partnership. If it has worked before, it can work again. And if it provides schools methodically and quickly and effectively and efficiently, well then, no problem. There is another issue, though, and that is the extent to which the subcontractors are exposed in this situation. And I feel that it is necessary now, and I know that the discussions have taken place between the Minister and his department and some of the people concerned, it's necessary to reassure them, in case that they might suffer a domino effect, that they might find themselves, as it were, left out in the cold while the debate took place between the receivers and the grabbing of assets, etc., that usually takes place in situations like this. I would ask that the Minister, if at all possible, would reassure the contractors as to what might be in their best interests, and with particular reference to schools that are already finished and ready for occupation and have been the subject matter of conciliation, which is the snagging that takes place in the normal course of events. If it were possible to expedite the process insofar as they were concerned, with a view to ensuring that resources came their way, because they have other projects that they wish to continue as well, and if the whole system is held up for any appreciable amount of time, ultimately the customer, i.e. the Department of Education, in its attempt to provide the facilities for the children in the schools throughout the country, will be affected as well.
John Brady.
Thanks, Concordia. Minister, the collapse of Carillion certainly didn't come as much of a surprise to myself and many other people who've seen this coming down the tracks. It has directly impacted on 2 schools in my own constituency, Ravenswell and Cloisterraheen, and I'm delighted that so many parents, teachers and pupils travel in from Wicklow, from Bray, to be in the public gallery from Cloisterraheen to hopefully hear some positive responses from yourself, Minister, and news as to when they can move in. Minister, the school in which Cloisterraheen are currently in is totally unsuitable, hence why a new building was built, bringing an end to a 23-year battle since 1995 to get the new school. Minister, it is totally unsuitable where they are currently. They're operating from 3 different locations within Bray, Minister. Pupils having to travel from one building to a different building in different parts of the town. In September, Minister, in the hope and the knowledge that a new school was forthcoming, they took on board a full extra class of first-year pupils, adding to the overcrowding in which they currently have. Minister, it is totally unsustainable. They also took on 2 additional subjects on the school curriculum, Minister, 2 new teachers. They don't have the facilities now to actually teach those subjects. They were hoping and had been promised that they, Coláiste Rahim, would be in their new school, which is fully complete, Minister, in October, November, December, and the latest date was the 22nd of January. Minister, all dates have come and gone. Minister, when I asked you initially about this, you said there would be no delays. Now we're saying we just don't know. Minister, I don't give a damn about what discussions, what negotiations, what legalities are going on, and I'm sure the teachers, the pupils and indeed their parents don't care either. What we want from you here today, Minister, is a specific date when the keys will be handed over to Coláiste Rahim and St Philomena's to bring an end to the 23-year battle that they've been engaged in. Minister, hopefully you will be able to provide assurances that they will get the keys sooner rather than later.
Deputy Stephen Donnelly.
Thanks, Ken Corley. Minister, there are clearly some serious questions that need asking about large international firms underbidding and winning contracts based on unsustainably low prices, leading to these sort of liquidations, and indeed pricing Irish firms out of the market. But that is for another day. I want to specifically draw your attention to the 2 schools in Bray, in Wicklow, St Philomena's and Coláiste Rahim. I attended a meeting last night in the school, and to say that the students and the parents and the teachers are angry and frustrated and exasperated is an understatement. They were meant to be moving in September. They increased the student numbers, they hired new staff, they increased the subjects. Then they were told October, then they were told November, then they were told December. And the principal relayed to the meeting last night that he was guaranteed that he and his team would be in by the end of January. And of course now we have what is happening here. The current school is not fit for purpose. And Minister, I just want to put on the record of the House what one of the students said last night. She said that the students are sick of sitting in cold rooms, getting chest infections and seeing mould on the wall. So that is what they want to move out of. Now, I've spoken to commercial insolvency experts about this, and their view is that assuming that the school has been built properly, and we know it is finished and it is ready, it just needs certification, that it should be no more than 6 weeks from the liquidation event of Carillion to this being wrapped up and the students and the staff being in the school. Now, we're 2 weeks into that process. So what I would like to hear from you tonight is that this is under control, that the contracts were written in a way that foresaw these types of events, that you're working with the main contractor, the subcontractors if necessary to get the certification, and with Carillion and with the liquidator, and the parents, and the teachers and the students know that by the end of February they will be in their schools. So that is the question I'd like to ask you, Minister. When can you tell the students and staff and parents of St Philomena's and Coláiste Rahim that they're going to be in their new schools? Thank you.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank all the deputies who contributed, and indeed many more. I know Andrew Dáil, Simon Harris, Pat Deering, Michael Darcy, Paul Keogh, many others have raised this with me, so I don't in any way undervalue the concern, and I'd like to welcome the school that's here. I think every one of these schools is very important to their local community. The reason they're being rebuilt in this way is because they are in serious need. The position, I'm glad to get the chance to come to the House to clarify the position. The compulsory liquidation of Carillion that was announced on the 15th of January, it certainly is regrettable. Inspired Spaces, which is a joint venture between Carillion and the Dutch Infrastructure Fund, DIF, was awarded the contract for the school's Bundle 5 PPP in 2016. Inspired Spaces is the PPP company responsible for the construction, finance, operation and maintenance of the 5 schools and one further education college included in the programme. Those buildings are approximately 90% complete, with 2 almost ready for occupation. I'd like to reassure Deputy Donnelly and others that there is best international practice in the way that this bundle has been put together. The contract includes detailed provisions that apply in the event of liquidation of a consortium member or an entity under the contract to ensure that the project proceeds to completion. This means that following the liquidation of Carillion, DIF is now required to intervene with the approval of the project funders to ensure that the project is completed to the satisfaction of the state. DIF has confirmed that resolution of the situation is its top priority. It is currently working to put in place a rectification plan to ensure that the schools are completed as soon as possible. The NDFA, which is part of the NTMA, is responsible for the management of these projects on behalf of the Department of Education and Skills. It is working to ensure that taxpayers' interests are protected, that the schools are delivered as quickly as possible through the implementation of the contract provisions. I can assure the deputies that this issue is being treated with the utmost urgency by both my department and the NDFA. Officials in my department are in constant contact with the NDFA, who are in turn closely liaising with the DIF. I've met with the NDFA and I'm satisfied that everything possible is being done at this time to ensure the schools can be delivered in as timely a manner as possible. I wish to acknowledge the very understandable concern of the school communities and all concerned with the projects in relation to the current lack of certainty surrounding dates for completion of the schools. The outcome of the ongoing process will provide greater clarity in relation to likely completion dates. While it had been initially hoped that an interim solution would be agreed and genuine efforts were made to achieve that, that has not been possible to date, and now a more detailed rectification plan is being finalised by DIF in consultation with its lenders. This comprehensive rectification plan will address, among other things, both the completion of the construction and the provision of services over the lifetime of the PPP contract. Importantly, this rectification plan does not place any financial obligations on the state. Its implementation is a matter for the private sector parties. While I cannot be definitive on the timelines for the agreement and implementation of the rectification plan, it is a feature of this PPP contract and PPP contracts more generally that there are legal, contractual and financial imperatives for the PPP company and the funders to deliver the buildings within the shortest possible timeframe. I might say that no money has been expended other than some site costs in relation to these 6 schools, which were estimated to be 100 million bundle. So 90% completion has been entirely funded by the parties involved, and they will not get a licence agreement which provides the payment of a universal charge each year for the next 25 years unless the schools are handed over so that they can be occupied and used by the pupils. So this is a strong position which the state is in. A key advantage of the PPP model is that the construction and funding risk is transferred to the private partner. That is why DIF, rather than the state, is now responsible for ensuring completion of the schools. This is also why we have 6 buildings which are close to completion, which indeed are in state ownership, but without any payment yet being made, other than, as I say, for the ones.
Back to you, Minister, for the balance. Now, Deputy Broughan again.
Yeah. I welcome the fact that the Department is meeting the principals and chairs of Board of Management. I think that's good, but I also think the Dáil deputies in the constituencies, and that includes the 2 main opposition education spokespersons as well, were in the constituencies, should also have a similar briefing, maybe not the same one, but I certainly would make myself available for that briefing if the Minister thought that that was appropriate. I am concerned by some of the responses. Well, first I should say this is utterly different from your initial reaction, Minister, and that's disappointing, but at least we're coming close to the truth of this. But there's some things left out of this. What you say, Minister, is that DIF is now required to intervene to ensure the project is completed to the satisfaction of the state. But you say there, with the approval of the project funders. Now, the project funder is actually the Bank of Tokyo Mitsubishi, the Japanese bank, the largest bank in Japan. Are you saying, Minister, that this project can't complete unless some official in Tokyo says that it can complete? Because your speech says that this has to have the approval of the project funder. Now, the funder is that bank. I think you need to clarify that, Minister, because quite frankly this is getting more complicated by the minute. And I think what we need here is clarity as to when people will be in these schools. And Minister, you didn't respond to my invitation that you would meet subcontractors. I think that would also be important as well, because they need confidence that they can operate the school projects into the future.
With the greatest respect, there's very little in that answer that was going to allay any fears from the schools, and I think there's a number of things in this. First of all, the whole issue around public-private partnerships, but that probably is a debate for a different day. That's not going to help the schools in question right now. But there's a number of schools, they're all in various stages. Some of them are actually literally ready to go, just waiting on keys, and I think that they obviously need to be prioritised. And so I don't know if having just a one-off meeting is going to be sufficient. I think the individual needs of each school needs to be looked at in this situation. And just to say as well, and I would hope that we'd get support from Deputy Byrne, also as the education spokesperson. We're looking to see if this can be discussed in the Education Committee as a matter of urgency and get the various relevant stakeholders in, because it's something that, you know, there's nothing in this really for the schools. They still don't know when they're going to have the keys, when they're going to be able to continue with their building. A number of students are facing into Leaving Cert this year. Are they looking? They're probably looking well past that before this issue is realistically dealt with, and I think we need just much better time frame on exactly how we're going to be briefed and how we're going to be kept updated.
It's a fundamental problem that you're asking. You're saying the risk has been taken by the private partner in this, and that's clearly not the case. The risk is being taken by the students, the teachers, the schools, their communities and the building workers who are now delayed from getting into buildings they badly need or knowing whether they're going to get paid. And this is the fundamental folly of public-private partnership. And then what you say is, you put your hands up in the air and say it's up to the private partner to sort this out. We can't sort it out. And that's supposed to be some sort of helpful assurance to people. That's the problem, is that you have signed away responsibility for delivering schools that communities and students badly need to other people who can walk away, but who are stood to make a massive profit. Reported €150 million they were going to make out of this deal for a €9 million investment, is what some reports. And we as TDs can't even find out the details of these PPPs because they're subject to commercial secrecy. Now, I want to repeat the call, Minister. Can the Budget Scrutiny Committee or PAC investigate the details of this PPP and other PPPs?
Deputy Casey. Deputy Pat Casey.
And can I thank the Minister as well, even though I'm looking at my answer to the parliamentary question last week and your answer today, and I'm not seeing any difference between the two of them. And I don't think this is good enough at this stage. As a Minister for Education, you should not be content with watching from the sidelines as the dreams and aspirations of the school community in Bray are being dashed. The staff and students and parents are looking at their new school buildings paid for with taxpayers' money, and due to the government incompetence, they do not know when they can take control of their own schools. This is a disgrace and a shocking indictment on this government. Minister, you need to take full control of this matter, and maybe can I ask you today to meet with the wider community of schools of Coláiste, Raheen and St Philomena's this week. Thank you.
Deputy Broughan.
Well, Minister, I understand the Controlling Auditor General has published in his annual report an article on PPPs, and just want to ask you, I mean, is this something you would, the collapse of Carillion and its impact on these communities, is that something you would welcome that the Public Accounts Committee would urgently investigate? There was to be an interdepartmental, I think, working group on PPPs that your colleague, Deputy Minister O'Donoghue, told us about, and I just wondered, I thought that was to report before the end of last year, and whether or not we will, we'll be getting a report on that. There was particular interest on the recommendations of the IMF's, the Public Investment Management Assessment, the PIMA assessment, and whether or not, for example, the bundle that we're now talking about, whether that would have got through the PIMA assessment. You mentioned about universal payments, and we'll have these payments of hundreds of millions of euro year in, year out. You think, by the way you talk, Minister, we got these schools for nothing. We will be paying year after year down to, is it 2053 or 2054? Is there any clawback, Minister, on the payment in relation to this bundle?
Thank you very much, Deputy McWallace.
Thanks, Concordia. Minister, I know you haven't put a time on it, but last week the Taoiseach told us that it will take a couple of weeks to sort this out. Well, if that happens, it will be a first. And if I would be telling the pupils and teachers in Wexford, Carlow, Wicklow and Meath not to be holding their breath. The liquidator, David Chapman, a civil servant working for the Insolvency Service, has been appointed, and he has been advised by 6 special managers from accountancy firm PricewaterhouseCoopers. There'll be wranglings till the cows come home. These things are not sorted quickly, and Minister, I think you should give an honest indication yourself as to how long it will take. And Minister, you might also address an issue for me. Last week, the Taoiseach said the state owns the buildings. I don't understand how they could own them. They may own a part of them. How can the state own the buildings when someone else built them and are owed a lot of money for them?
Thank you very much, Deputy Durkin.
My concern would be, as I said at the outset, I think it's important to reassure the Irish contractors that their liabilities are covered, or that they are not ultimately liable for something that went wrong in another jurisdiction in particular. And I would ask maybe that the Minister might, if at all possible, make contact with the Irish subcontractors with a view to alleviating their worries. Their worries are, if the matter drags on indefinitely, it's going to put them under financial pressure unnecessarily. And while they can deliver the goods as it stands at the present time, a long drawn-out argument in the courts or elsewhere would not be to the benefit of either the Department of Education, the parents and children hoping to attend school, or, and particularly so, the Irish subcontractors. So I would just ask if the Minister might see his way to in some way, get officials of his department to indicate to the Irish subcontractors as to what the outcome might be, and also to expedite the process of finishing off and making payments.
Minister, this ultimately is going to end up in a protracted legal case. Liquidations do not end well, and this will be no different. So the teachers, pupils and parents are now at the mercy of a potential legal case, but also at the mercy of banks in Tokyo and indeed Germany. And Minister, you would be well aware that a PPP for 25 years, it's only at the end of that PP that the state will actually take control of that actual asset. So I think you need to clarify that. So Minister, we cannot wait for all of that to happen. I'm asking you a number of specific questions, and I want answers. What arrangements are you going to put in place? What contingency arrangements, Minister? Will you look at emergency legislation to ensure that the pupils, teachers can get into those schools immediately? Coláiste Raheen, Minister, just needs certification. Will you ensure that there's a fast tracking of that certification process to ensure that Coláiste Raheen can move in? Minister, will you look at putting in place a caretaker maintenance arrangement for Coláiste Raheen and the other schools that are complete to ensure that they can move in? And just a final point, a very important point. Coláiste Raheen, Minister, is fully equipped. Tables, chairs, whiteboards, the full lot. There is fears that the suppliers of those materials haven't been paid and that they will go into the school, like they have in others, to withdraw those materials. Will you ensure that the suppliers are fully paid and that the materials will not be stripped from the schools, adding to the delays that the schools will face?
Deputy Stephen Donnelly.
Thanks, Cian Curley. Minister, I have no doubt that you want to get these schools open. But I don't think anyone who wants to get into these schools will take a lot of comfort from your statement. You stated that, quote, "I am satisfied that everything possible is being done." My understanding is the subcontractors have not been engaged with. Now, you stated to the House a few minutes ago that subcontractors are beginning to remove, or one of the other deputies, that subcontractors are beginning to remove equipment. So have subcontractors been engaged with? If they haven't, will you please engage? Will you commit to engaging with the subcontractors this week? We cannot have a situation where worried subcontractors are removing equipment from the schools. Minister, you also said you'd keep the House updated as details of the rectification plan are confirmed. At this point, it is disappointing that you don't have specific dates. So can you give us indicative dates, and can you tell us when you will have the rectification plan in place? And finally, if you come back to the House, hopefully later this week, I would say at a minimum next week, with the proposed dates for when these schools will be accessible to the students and to the parents, if the answer to that is it's going to take more than a few weeks, will you commit to immediately putting in place a contingency plan that is a bridging legal agreement that gets the children and the students into these schools? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Minister, now to conclude, please.
A few points. First, to reassure Deputy Byrne that DIF has been mandated by the funders to put together the rectification plan. It's been put together as fast as possible, so there's no question of funders anywhere, if you like, not not being interested in this. To answer the point, are we at the mercy of funders? That's not the case. Funders will not get their money unless they complete and hand over the building and get the licence agreement. They have paid the money, not the state. So the only way in which they will get their money back is by handing over the buildings and completing these. And that's why there is such urgency on the part of DIF and the funders to get this rectification plan in place. I just have to clarify to deputies misunderstanding. Subcontractors do not have a contract with the state. The subcontractors have a contract with the provider, and the state is not stepping in to underwrite the obligations of the provider, because under the PPP contract it is DIF that holds the responsibility, which is set out in the contract, to complete these schools, and they will not be paid until they complete them. The issue of PPP reviews, I mean, in our situation, less than 20% of schools, 17% of completions has been done by PPP. Any state will have a mixture of projects. I'm always open to look at the merits of cases, and I think the DEPR is undertaking a review of PPPs. But you know, and so is the CNAG, and you know, we're open to that. But in terms of this, the concentration on this has to be to get the contract to work and to get this completion, as is the legal obligation. The funders will only get their money if they can come up with the handing over the schools completed to the proper standard. Then they will get their licence agreement. Without completing that, they do not get their licence agreement, and the state will not be paying them any money or anyone involved. I think that's really the important thing. We must use the power of the contract, which protects people, to ensure that it is those who took the legal responsibility here complete their work. And I can assure you that the NDFA will be vigorously pursuing that. I think it's in everyone's interest, most of all those who have funded and built this project, that they do get to that completion point as quickly as possible. And to be fair, that is what they have indicated they are seeking to do. But I can assure the Deputy that I will keep a very close eye on this. I can understand the concerns, and I will work, work with the NDFA to secure this outcome as quickly as possible.
That concludes